Hello, my name is Sven P. In this video I will show you how I built this oriental monastery. This video, by the way, is sponsored by Gportal. Click the link in the description for 5% off your Gportal servers. I figured I'd make something on Chrysalis because the map was just released there on console. If you want to build this yourself or build something here yourself, the coordinates are 54, 53, and it is located in the Emberfalls region of the map. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed and commented, because it took me about 10 hours to build this and way longer to edit the video. The base location is something I often spend hours just trying to find the perfect location. Then I let my imagination fill it as I build with something I find fitting. When I build, I almost never have a plan. I just find a cool place and let my imagination run wild as I build. This time I started off with a bridge, thinking I would get a better idea of what to build after I made it. At first, I imagined something like Rivendell from Lord of the Rings, the elven town, but then I realized I could try some Asian architecture, maybe a monastery or a pagoda. The type of structures that I used here are wood, stone and adobe. There's no metal or tech or thatch in this build. These building materials goes very well together, not just for an Asian architecture, but for all types of building. I ended up painting everything in brick and white at the end, but it also looks really cool in the original colors, I think. I'd never built in the style that I ended up building in before, so the first building that I tried was the pagoda to the right of the bridge, which is the one that I'm building right now. This was the guinea pig for me, and it turned out really great, I thought. It was, however, nowhere near the epicness of the monastery that I ended up building afterwards. But while we're at the pagoda, let's talk about this ancient structure. It originated from India, but hardly looked like the pagodas that we see in other parts of Asia. They were called stupas and were used to house relics and remnants of saints. Buddha was a saint whose ashes was sent to many different stupas. The Indian stupa was dome-shaped and often with a tower on top. The pagodas in China came a little later and were sometimes very tall. After that came the Japanese ones. The Japanese usually has 5 floors, each symbolizing elements, lowest one being earth, then water, fire, wind, and on top space. The pagodas were mostly used for Buddhist practices. Monks would use them to meditate, and the pagodas were said to have supernatural powers. They would protect the village from bad weather and also demons, even bad grades. One time a pagoda collapsed, a lot of examinations for important government positions failed that year, and they thought it was because of the pagoda collapsing. When the pagoda was rebuilt later, a lot of people passed their examination. So for those of you that are in school, I recommend watching this video to the end, so that you'll get good grades. One thing that is really interesting about the pagodas is how they were made. They were made without nails because, having the attitude of working with nature instead of against it, they thought they could make the pagodas very sturdy, and they could even withstand earthquakes. To this day, the way the pagodas were made are used in modern day tall buildings to withstand earthquakes, something that happens frequently in many parts of Asia. The pagodas has joints all over, so that instead of breaking when an earthquake happens, the pagoda will move like a snake and reduce the momentum from the earthquake. Since there is no nails, the nails won't be worn out either. Most of the old pagodas that you see today are made of stone, because despite the great craftsmanship, wood doesn't last forever and will eventually have to be replaced. It is very costly to keep a wooden pagoda maintained, which is why the 355-foot tall wooden pagoda, which is the tallest one ever made, was supposedly burned down due to uselessness and high maintenance costs during the Song dynasty in China. One could also speculate this was because they believed that pagodas that were built too tall would disturb the spirits and the gods that were flying around, and they would crash into the tall pagodas. Buddhist philosophy is also quite interesting, and they have stories called parables that are supposed to help us see truths about our existence. I'm gonna now read you a Buddhist parable called The Hungry Dog. There was a king who oppressed his people and was hated by his subjects, yet when the Buddha came to his kingdom, the king desired much to see him. So Buddha went to the palace and was asked, "Shakyamuni, can you teach a lesson to the king that will divert his mind and benefit him at the same time?" And Buddha said, "I should tell you the parable of the hungry dog." There was a wicked tyrant, and the god Indra, assuming the shape of a hunter, came down on earth with the demon Matali, the latter appearing as a dog of enormous size. Hunter and dog entered the palace, and the dog howled so wofully that the royal buildings shook by the sound of their very foundations. The tyrant had the awe-inspiring hunter brought before his throne and inquired after the cause of the terrible bark. The hunter said, "The dog is hungry," whereupon the frightened king ordered food for him. All the food prepared at the royal banquet disappeared rapidly in the dog's jaws, and still he howled with portentous significance. More food was sent for, and all the royal storehouses were emptied, but in vain. Then the tyrant grew desperate and asked, "Will nothing satisfy the cravings of that woful beast? Nothing?" "Nothing," replied the hunter. "Nothing except perhaps the flesh of all his enemies." "And who are his enemies?" anxiously asked the tyrant. The hunter replied, "The dog will howl as long as there are people hungry in the kingdom, and his enemies are those who practices injustice and oppresses the poor." The oppressor of the people, remembering his evil deeds, was seized with remorse, and for the first time in his life, he began to listen to the teaching of righteousness. Having ended his story, the Blessed One addressed the king, who had turned pale, and said to him, "The true seeker can quicken the spiritual ears of the powerful, and when you, great king, hear the dog bark, think of the teachings of the Buddha, and you may still learn to pacify the monster." What I gather from this parable is that it is trying to explain the concept that is the more you have, the more you want. The hungry dog is the tyrant's inner demons, wanting more and more power. The moral of the story is, there is never enough. So if there is never enough, what's the point of anything at all, you might ask? Monasteries like the one that I'm about to be building here has typically been inhabited by people who believe that having nothing and craving nothing was the answer. People that would just eat tiny bits of rice to survive and just meditate and exist all day were the people that would live in a monastery like this. That is very hard for us in the internet age to understand. We never take the time to just exist. We never live in the moment. It is always the past and the future for us. But the reality is, the past and the future doesn't even exist. It's just a concept to confuse us. Possessions, belongings, power, achievements. It means nothing in the grand scheme of things. And once you realize this, it also becomes worthless. Because it is worthless. The parable of the evil king is about how each and every one of us becomes fearful and evil when we are too attached to something worldly, and that our true nature and self is to be indifferent to things like that. And we should, and we are able to strive for a life of indifference to material belongings. With all that being said, these are not my own personal beliefs, because with indifference becomes problems. I wouldn't be able to show you this build if you didn't have a computer or a phone. Someone who meditates all day also isn't able to feed anyone, and they have to rely on other people feeding them. To me, greed is what drives us to get us what we need. The problem arises when we can't realize when we have enough. Now that we are at the part where I make the monastery, I'm going to explain my thought process behind it. A while ago, I had built a temple in Conan Exiles, which I called Temple of the White Tiger. The name is interesting because the building in real life that most closely resembled the end result is called Tiger's Nest. I'll get more into that later though. I didn't want to make the same thing as I did in Conan Exiles, but the temple had an E shape, where the middle line of the letter E would be the entrance, and the parts of the building would stick out on each side, like the top line and the bottom line of the letter E. The entrance I wanted to be a glorious staircase going up to the temple. As you can see, I used the same building style as on the pagoda. I had become comfortable after some experimentation and was confident enough to start with something more ambitious. The experimentation was making the pagoda. Truth be told, this is to me one of the best art builds that I've ever made. The location is very beautiful, and I feel like I managed to make a building with a lot of personality to it. Once it's done, you'll be able to see the majesticness of the monastery, like as if it is a throne looking out over crystal isles. The building ended up resembling a monastery in real life called Takstang, probably butchering that pronunciation, but it's also known as Tiger's Nest. It got the name because Guru Rinpoche, probably also butchering that one, rode a tiger to this location all the way from Tibet to Bhutan, which is where this monastery is located. That tiger was the former wife of a Chinese emperor who had transformed herself. There are many caves where Guru Rinpoche meditated, and the enlightenment that he received here made the place holy. Later, after the Guru's death, he reincarnated and built a temple here with the help of enlightened monks. My build doesn't look that much like Tiger's Nest, but it did end up having the same energy and vibe to it. There are both monasteries that are very hard to get to. I like the idea that you have to travel and climb for a very long time to get up here, but once you are here you are rewarded with an incredible view. It feels like one of those movies where the main character has a journey to the top of the mountain to achieve enlightenment. Close to the real-life Tiger's Nest is a river that is said to have purifying power to all life forms that drink from the water. I like to think that the waterfall next to my build is the same, and is how Crystal Isles got all its liveliness and colorfulness. In real life, the Tiger's Nest is inhabited by monks who really live up to the Buddhist lifestyle. They hardly eat, and they very rarely go to the towns that are nearby. The monastery is closed to anyone else except for one part of the year, where tourists are allowed to visit, but not allowed to use cameras. It takes 5 hours to get there from the nearest town, so it's quite a journey. In 1998, a fire killed one of the monks and burnt down many valuable paintings, artifacts and statues. The cost of repairing the damages, which was done in 2005, was close to $2 million, but the life of the monk and the items could never be restored. A monastery is a community of monks and nuns who have chosen to withdraw from society, forming a new community devoted to religious practice. The word monk comes from the Greek word monos, which means alone. It can be difficult to focus a lot of time on prayers and religious rituals when time needs to be spent on everyday activities that ensure one's survival, such as food and shelter. Monks and nuns pray on behalf of the people. The monastery typically becomes the spiritual focus of the nearest town or village. In Christianity, the monks pray for the salvation of the souls of the living, but in Buddhism, the goal is not heaven. Rather, it is the cessation from the endless cycle of rebirth, also known as samsara, and to realize nirvana, or liberation, which is to be released into the infinite state of oneness with everything. Adept practitioners of Buddhism understood that not everyone was ready to perform the necessary rites to obtain the ultimate goals of ending samsara. The common person could, however, improve their karma, an action or deed that enacts a cycle of cause and effect, by everyday charitable acts that were mostly directed towards the monastic community. The Buddhist monks and nuns meditated and prayed on behalf of the community, those without specialized knowledge of the faith, assisting them in the goal of realizing the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths are: life is suffering, the cause of suffering is desire, the cause of desire must be overcome, when desire is overcome, there is no more suffering. Monks and nuns also instructed the lay practitioner on how to conduct the rites, how to meditate, and advised them about which Buddhist deity to focus on. This depended on the issue or obstacle in the practitioner's path to enlightenment. The laity, in turn, supported the monks with donations of food and other necessary items. The laity in this context will be someone that belongs to the village and is not a monk or a nun from the monastery. It was a mutually beneficial relationship. Also makes me think of the Elder Scrolls Skyrim. There is a monastery called High Hrothgar in the game, and there is a quest to deliver supplies to them from the village close to the mountain. To finish this build, perhaps I should build a village at the bottom of the mountain with a path going all the way up here. I did not build that in this video, but if that is something that you would like to see, let me know in the comments below. I have another parable here that I would like to read. It is called The Patient Elephant. While Buddha was residing by the Jetavana Monastery, there was a householder living in there, known to all his neighbors as patient and kind. But his relatives were wicked and contrived a plot to rob him. One day they came to the householder, and by worrying him with all kinds of threats, took away a goodly portion of his property. He did not go to court, nor did he complain, but tolerated with great forbearance all the wrongs he suffered. The neighbors wondered and began to talk about it, and rumors of the affair reached the ears of the brethren in Jetavana. While the brethren discussed the occurrence in the assembly hall, Buddha entered and asked, "What was the topic of your conversation?" And they explained it to him. Buddha said, "The time will come when wicked relatives will find their punishment, brethren. This is not the first time that this occurrence has taken place. It has happened before. and he told them a world-old tale. Once upon a time, the Bodhisattva was born in the Himalaya region as an elephant. By the way, Bodhisattva, as it is written here, as far as I know, with my limited Buddhist knowledge, means someone who sort of achieved nirvana, but decided, nah, I'm gonna help people by teaching lessons instead of ending the cycle. They have a choice to not be reborn, but they choose to be reborn. Anyways, to continue the story here. He grew up strong and big and ranged the hills and mountains, the peaks and caves of the tortuous woods in the valleys. Once as he went, he saw a pleasant tree and took his food standing under it. Then some impertinent monkeys came down out of the trees and jumped on the elephant's back, insulted and tormented him greatly. They took hold of his tusks, pulled his tail, and disported themselves, thereby causing him much annoyance. Bodhisattva, being full of patience, kindliness and mercy, took no notice at all of their misconduct, which the monkeys repeated again and again. One day the spirit that lived in the tree, standing on the tree trunk, addressed the elephant saying, "My lord elephant, why do you put up with the impudence of these bad monkeys?" The Bodhisattva, on hearing this, replied, "If tree sprite, I cannot endure these monkeys' ill treatment without abusing their birth, lineage and persons. How can I walk in the eightfold noble path? But these monkeys will do the same to others, thinking them to be like me. If they do it to any rogue elephant, he will punish them indeed, and I shall be delivered both from their annoyance and the guilt of having done harm to others. If they will treat another one like me, he will destroy them and I shall be free." A few days later, the Bodhisattva went elsewhere, and another elephant, a savage beast, came and stood in his place. The wicked monkeys, thinking him to be like the old one, climbed on his back and did as before. The rogue elephant seized the monkey with his trunk, threw him on the ground, gored them with his tusk, and trampled them into mice meat under his feet. When the master had ended his teaching, he declared the truths, saying, "At that time, the mischievous monkeys were the wicked relatives of the good man. The rogue elephant was the one who will punish them, but a virtuous noble elephant was the reincarnated enlightened Bodhisattva." After the discourse, one of the brethren rose and asked, "I have heard a doctrine that wrong should be met with wrong, and the evildoer should be checked by being made to suffer. For if this were not done, evil would increase and good would disappear. What shall we do?" Buddha replied, "No, I will tell you, you who have left the world and have adopted this glorious faith of putting aside selfishness. You shall not do evil for evil, nor return hate for hate. Neither think that you can destroy wrong by retaliating evil for evil, and thus increasing wrong. Leaving the wicked to their fate and their evil deeds, will sooner or later, in one way or another, bring on their own punishment. Leave the wicked to their fate, and their evil deeds will sooner or later, in one way or another, bring on their own punishment, whether by disease, or loss of wealth, or reincarnation in hell. The moral of the story sounds like, put up with everything, never retaliate, because doing so will taint your soul and you will be reborn as a lesser life form. Our souls are more important than defending our territory, properties, and physical well-being. Here is yet another parable putting the value of worldly matters very low, because it argues that we should put up with wrongdoings. Retaliations by doing harm will cause guilt and other negative feelings in us. Ultimately, it is worse than the harm initially done to us. Personally, I don't find this very logical. I think the first elephant had a duty as the stronger animal to teach a lesson to the monkeys. The enlightened elephant knowingly taught them that bullying is okay, so that they would bully the rogue elephant and then get killed. First elephant should, in my view, have caused a low degree of harm towards the monkey, so they would be discouraged from doing it again. The non-violent approach here seems like a huge cop-out to me, and the reincarnated elephant, in my view, is somewhat responsible for the monkey's death. Another aspect of this is the belief that the sinner will get their punishment in hell, and the good doer will be rewarded in heaven, not unlike Christianity. Leaving it up to karma or God to enforce good behavior in humans sounds like a bad idea to me. I don't believe this is something that is practiced in many places though, because a society that doesn't punish crime wouldn't survive. With all of this being said, the story is a parable. It is meant to see things in a certain light, an idealized way of looking at things. It is very hard for a good person to repay harm with harm. It takes someone capable of evil to do this. But someone who is capable of evil is also a little bit evil and has the capacity to do wrong things to people themselves. A soul is tainted when harm is repaid with harm, and the answer to this is to realize that we must repay with the minimum necessary harm. Enough to make the monkeys not want to do it again, but no matter how much you do, you will taint your soul a little bit. This is the most effective way to rehabilitate criminals, I believe, which is also something a lot of Buddhists today advocate for, making sure that the purpose of punishment is rehabilitation rather than revenge. We are closing in on the end of the build, and I'm now building the main part of the monastery. The build can be seen at this point as 4 different towers. There's the pagoda that I built first on the other side of the waterfall, and the 3 ones on this part making the monastery. Monasteries like this, I actually read that very often has a pagoda close to it. My monastery has 2 towers that are copies of each other on each side, and a larger, taller tower a little further back in the middle of them, creating the shape of the throne. I tried to get some World of Warcraft feel to this build that way. I wanted my monastery to look not just like a nice place to meditate and chill, but also grandeur and majestic. Another temple that comes to mind is the Marble Temple in Bangkok. It doesn't exactly look the same, but the majestic sense I feel is present in that one and the one that I just made. On another topic, a lot of you guys keep asking me about this song that we're listening to right now. It's made by a close friend of mine. His name is Edvard Bolås, and I would strongly recommend checking his channel out. He has been releasing a lot of new music lately. A link to his channel is in the description of this video, and if you go there, make sure you say hi from me. As you can see, I did a mix of adobe, stone and wood for all 4 towers. I find that neither of these looks interesting just by themselves, but combined together creates a lot of detail and depth to a build. Unlike in other games, it feels like in Ark that the different tiers of structure are actually designed to look well together. The walls are a combination of adobe and wood, and I did it this way to make it feel more detailed and less boring to look at. On the tallest tower, the wooden walls are facing inwards rather than outwards. That is another way of creating variety with the different blocks. While adobe and especially stone looks quite ugly on the inside, wood is different on the inside rather than being better or worse. On the outside, wood has sort of a cabin in the woods kind of feel to it, but on the inside it looks more polished and bright and less harsh. Therefore, for a build that is supposed to look pretty, it is very useful for depth to sometimes have wood be inside out. The inside of wood also goes very well with the outside of wood. I use stone for the foundations, but also I use a stone pillar to sort of have a frame around the build because the corners look weird and incomplete without it. There are also stone walls at the lower parts of each tower, making the towers feel like they are a little bit grounded. I was debating with myself whether or not I wanted a railing down here on the staircase, because railings with the Homestead update, they can go diagonal, but they get really short when you do it like that, because they don't stretch out like they do on S+. So what I decided to do was that I'd have a pillar in between each gap, so that the gap wouldn't be visible, and then I'd eventually just place some torches here and it will look nice. My roofs were made of wood and painted eventually red. I placed stone railings all over the roofs to create a frame again, because the edges of the wood looks incomplete. All the adobe was painted white, even though adobe can never truly be white because of the brown parts that you can't paint. The outer parts of the wood was left brown, while the inside I painted white. I left some parts of the inside of those planks in their original color to create more detail and depth. And that concludes the building process of this video here. I'm gonna show you the time-lapse now, and then show a showcase of the full build. I hope you have enjoyed so far. I'm really happy about it. Also let me know what you think about this format for a video. Anyways, run time-lapse, let's go! Thank you so much for watching. I invite you all to join my Discord. You can find it in the description of this video. Feel free to share screenshots of your builds there, say hi, all that good stuff. And I'll see you around.